We humans have been doing something very weird the past few months. Just when this virus is reminding us of our mortality, we have stopped celebrating death. When the COVID-19 virus arrived and started to kill us in our human zoos in the cities where we caged ourselves up, we started to dispose of the bodies, as if we have forgotten that our species has, some very special trick, death rituals, something that we have been performing for at least 2 million years. Our social life is in fact packed with all sorts of rituals. Maybe once or twice in a month we are going to have a meal with our extended family and friends, a communal meal. And a few times a year we're going to have birthdays, name days, days devoted to gods. And apart from these, there are some other kinds of rituals that help us not only passing the days and weeks and years, but going through our lives. And these give aid in moments when we have to face that not only we are mortal, but every one of those that we love will die one day. There are many other animals that use grieving as a psychological trick, as a mechanism to deal with the passing of a loved one, or super social, playful, long-living, large-brained mammals do that, one form or the other. But we are the only one whose culture prescribes what to do exactly when somebody dies, whether we should go to the vicinity of the body or not, whether we should touch it or not, whether we should sing or not sing, dance, eat something, not eat something, drink something, have a party or not have a party, and what to do when eventually you have to dispose of the body, whether we dress it or not, whether we put it under the ground or burn it or give it to the vultures or even, in some cultures, eat it. And when we forget that, we are having some trouble dealing with the loss, even more than it would have to be. Hello, I'm David-Barrett. I'm an evolutionary behavioral scientist. I learned anthropology from my master, Renée Hirschon. So a few weeks ago, I gave her a call. Renée grew up in South Africa. She was rich, white and super privileged, which she shook all off when she joined the anti-apartheid movement. And a few years later, when she left South Africa, she became the founder of feminist anthropology. All her life, she stood up against inhumanity of all form, and at the same time, she was ready to listen to every culture and everyone's point of view. And for me personally, she was very important because she taught me the methods of anthropology. I think right now I have one of my masters rather irritated.
Extremely irritable. But I must excuse you. It's not just you. It was from early this morning I've been irritable. It's just got to a peak now. It's expressed by people either greeting one another or not greeting one another. And I'm talking about in this complex I'm living in. What we are deprived of now is the ritual of sharing coffee in the morning at 10:30, voluntarily if you wished or not, but it was something that brought people together, and they're no longer allowed to do that. So they're feeling deprived.
In retirement homes all around the world, people are taking a crazy risk with their lives when they are violating the rules of physical distancing. And it turns out what they are really missing is the morning coffee ritual. I brought some coffee, so if you'd like to have a Piraeus coffee ritual, you could teach me how to do it.
Okay. And here's my cup.
Because that step-by-step sequence of sociality, of social engagement with our group members, is what our species does. And I know this because I'm exactly the same. So before COVID, in the olden times, when friends would come over, they would go through a ritualized arrival process. So They arrive, we hug, I invite them in, I give them some wine or water. They ask what they could have. I'm giving them some garlic and say, can you please peel this? And up until that moment, everything is the same. In fact, some of my anthropologist friends have described how ritualized this is. And now, when I'm missing my friends, despite the fact that I very regularly talk to them either on Zoom or on Skype or on the phone, I wonder what is it that's not there. And I realized that the missing part is that ritual. And that's what's lacking for people all over the world.
Summed up with the word sociability. And in this case, because we are talking about Anglo-Saxons, it's not to do with hugging and greeting like Italians have been complaining. The Italians have been saying we can't stand it because we're not allowed to touch one another. This is crazy. You're not Italian if you don't hug somebody. I think that's the other thing which people are feeling quite a lot of need of reassurance. It makes them very irritable. They don't get appreciated. And so, because you don't see your friends and you can't talk to them easily, they're not saying the things that they would say. Okay. Ooh, now see here, I'm feeling irritable. I can hear people outside on my patio.
People are really on a very short fuse.
Yeah. This particular period, which is a ritual period, okay, it's Easter and Pesach.
Right.
I think, and also it's going to be Ramadan quite soon. So this last weekend, for observers of the Western Easter and Pesach, it was a loaded time for ritual. And I heard discussions about how difficult it was for the Jewish families because they couldn't get together. How can you have Pesach without the family? And all of that. And how do you deal with the lack of physical proximity in a situation where that ritual demands it on a family basis? Okay, that's one way. And the other thing is Easter in the Western Church, which is last weekend, culminates on Easter Sunday for believers and non-believers with a big Easter meal. And that meal is roast, usually a roast lamb. So my example comes from a friend of mine who lives in North Oxford. They've lived in Greece for a long time, and they know that the Greek custom of Easter is essentially sharing food of that kind, of having a big lamb on a skewer, huge one, and you turn it around for hours and hours, and you share it with your neighborhood. So this couple did the same thing with their neighbors across the fence. So she phoned me on Easter Sunday, and she said, we're going to have our lamb with our neighbors. We're going to have the same thing, and we're going to share the food. And then she said spontaneously, would you like some? I said, oh, I really wouldn't mind having some meat. She said, I'll bring it to you. And she did. She came on her bicycle from North Oxford late in the afternoon with a chunk of this lamb, plus a cake that she'd made. So that was interesting insight into accommodating to the changed conditions of coronavirus, but trying to maintain a kind of ritualized meal. And I thought that would be of interest to you, right?
So we have been losing rituals for a very long time. While every traditional society is packed with rituals, in fact, often when anthropologists go to study other traditions, other cultures, what they do is that describe the rituals that have people go through life. In modernity, with secularization, we lost many of these. So we are born and there's no special celebration around it. When we go through the age of 12 to 14, there's no coming of age ritual. We forget those. When we fall in love and move in together with somebody and maybe even get down to the business of making babies, we don't celebrate it. There's no ritual around it. Maybe we show up in the municipality, 4 of us. And that is something that is now happening to death as well. When we chuck out the bodies and we dispose of that old tradition of death rituals, we are touching something very deeply human. In fact, archaeologists for a long time thought that the time in the past, that before that, The bones, human bones, were on the surface, and after that they were deliberately dug into the ground, was the moment when something qualitative changed. Archaeologists put this to a few 10,000 years ago, but a few years ago, in Johannesburg, an archaeologist team found an amazing thing. In a cave system lived a species called Homo naledi, our sister species. And at the end of the cave, very difficult to get to part, there were some bodies that were especially disposed of. And the most likely explanation we can have about this is that they were part of a death ritual. These bodies were carried there as part of some kind of funeral. And this is very interesting because this small-brained species is very remotely related to us. In fact, our shared ancestor is 2 million years ago. So we almost certainly had the same ritual, and it might go back to 2 million years. And that would mean that death rituals are one of the cornerstones of our species. It is one of our tricks.
People are trying to maintain their connections in ritualized ways, but are feeling irritable and frustrated because they can't do it. In my experience as an anthropologist, I was very much involved in death rituals in Piraeus, in the community I lived in. 3 people died, and I was close to those 3 families. So I was on red alert, observing absolutely everything, but I was also emotionally involved because they were people I knew. And what came out of that in my research was a very profound respect for the therapeutic effects of grieving and mourning rituals. Extraordinary, actually. And I don't think I've discussed this with you, but last week I had a conversation on the phone with a nurse who's in the respiratory team that looks after me. And we got onto this thing about, because I have to sign a form to say I don't want to go to hospital and do not resuscitate. And she said, "Oh, how are you facing up to that?" I said, "Look, it's not a problem for me. It's not like death is something I deny. I understand we're all mortals and we have to go." She said, "Well, it's very difficult for a lot of people at the moment that we're treating and we're looking after because they actually haven't been prepared for it, for the possibility that they might die and how are they going to die." And so I told her about this research, and I said to her that the important thing about these Greek rituals was that they are timed. So from the time of death, there's a ritual on the 3rd day, the 9th day, the 40th day, the 3rd month, the 6th month, and the year. And when I told the nurse that, she said, "That's a remarkable thing because we often forget that it's a process, that you don't just lose your loved one and feel grief and then it's supposed to be over in a week." And she said, "I want to share it to my colleagues." So here's somebody who's working in that context, who is noticing that this hiatus in our ability to deal with death is actually, well, so I said to you, it's destructive. Because if it's also imposed on us by law, so you can't even go to a funeral of your own parents, or you can only restrict it to 12 people, this is appalling. It's really undercutting what I would see as one of the fundamentals of our human social existence.
This COVID-19 virus has robbed us of death rituals. It makes a lot of policy sense to keep people away from funerals and not to mingle, because then they catch the virus from each other. But at the same time, without the ability to go through that culturally prescribed process of grieving, ritualized grieving, we suffer deeply. We are a community living ape, and as thus we rely on these rituals. The good news is that you are not only a community living ape, but you're also a very innovative one. So if you have figured out how to create an event that celebrates someone's life when they have passed, to commemorate someone, to bring the community together in some form of ritual, new ritual, innovative ritual, adapted ritual, please write to me and tell me and then we will find a way to pass it on to the world.